Here we are with Jean Marin for the second webinar dedicated to sharing experiences and discussing equipment. As I was saying, it's only right, more legitimate. Jean Marin here to share his experience with us. A multiple participant in our Cross and Gralps events, multiple finisher as well. Jean Marin, also known as the pink helmet on social media. Can you tell us about that? It's important for people to make the connection between Jean Marin online and Jean Marin in real life, in everyday life. Before I get into the specific questions, could you please introduce yourself in a few words and tell us a bit more about your professional background?
Perfect. So I'm Jean Marin, known as the Pink Helmet on social media. I have personally been cycling for about 10 years now, and I truly got hooked on the challenge of long distance riding about 4 or 5 years ago when I started exploring much further distances. Since then, I've taken part in all sorts of races, race across, gravel Alps, mainly in Paris, France and Switzerland. Furthermore, in addition to all of that, I am also happily married with 2 wonderful young children who are currently aged 4 and 9 years old. I try to balance all of that with my full-time job at the Geneva hospital. I juggle everything at once and it all goes wonderfully well because I'm well supported. And it also allows me to train and share my experiences with you.
Great, awesome. It's true that we've had the chance to see your whole family at various finish lines indeed. So thank you for that introduction, Jean Marin. Let's get into the discussion. The goal today is to talk about equipment, to share feedback and experiences. We're going to talk right away about equipment, specifically the bike and the setup. Jean Marin, could you share with us how your setup has evolved over the years? That is to say, what changes have you made to your setup, to your bike, whether it's for Gralps or for the Race Cross series? How are you equipped today and what have you changed over time? Is it the riding position? Is it the heavy bags? Is it the specific aero setup? Is it the choice of pedals? Because you can certainly have standard road pedals, and in the end, on your own road bike, you could easily put gravel pedals. Gravel, I'll let you take it from here.
Well, that's very interesting, and it's like with any sports project, even for travel. The first race cross, I did it as a duo. Race cross France, 300 kilometers. And I had a bike that was way too loaded, way too many bags, way too much gear. And in the end, none of it was useful to me, except for adding weight. I had a frame bag, a top tube bag, a handlebar bag, and a saddle bag. So really, over 300 kilometers, it was completely useless. I had road pedals. I was really set up for road riding and with way too much gear. So actually what I changed right from my second race was to reduce it. The volume, quite simply. There's no need to carry so much gear, especially for distances of 300 kilometers. So for example, I no longer have any handlebar bag at all for the 300 kilometer. I do not have a frame bag anymore. I just have a 2-liter top tube bag. But on the other hand, I like to take a camelback, so I have my water, especially for the night. This year, it's going to be different. The 300-kilometer races are going to be heavy-duty races, but before they used to be at night. So I liked having a bit of a water pouch, and I kept some gear in it. And that's something I've changed as well. I'm going to change it again this year because I have a new setup, but I used to ride with gravel or MTB pedals. For comfort, I switched from very stiff road shoes to more comfortable shoes. And now I'm moving to a new system. That's not Shimano, it's a new system. So I'm going to try out some new equipment this year. And that's basically the main difference. It was mostly the gear and the clothing. I used to take way too much. I used to carry way too much weight too. I'm lucky to have been able to upgrade my gear and to have figured out what was actually needed. So that's why now for a 300-kilometer ride, I really just have a saddle bag, a top tube bag, and that's it.
It's true that in ultra-distance events, people often say that on your first experiences, you bring your fears with you, meaning you bring too much comfort. But that's the classic mistake. I remember during a race across France, once I saw a rider show up and set off with his camping stove and pots. Sorry. And indeed, you see all kinds of setups. And it's good that you mention it because that mistake of bringing too much comfort with you is generally the mistake. I'm not sure if you can call it a beginner's mistake, but you often bring your fears along. In any case, I'm afraid of being cold, so I pack extra clothing. I'm afraid of being hungry, so I bring way too much food. You bring 15 bars and end up eating only one. So it's typical, but what is it? Is it the luggage? Is it the food? Is it really the gear? Did you really notice a big difference for yourself between your beginnings, your first experience as a duo, and now when you're much more experienced? What was it? What was the game changer for you?
It's also about sharing experiences and talking with other people. So I remember the first Galps, so 2 years ago. I actually found myself after 2 days at the post office sending gear back home because I had way too much equipment, too many repair tools. I had 4 inner tubes with me, even though the shops were open, for example. I had 1 pair of cycling shorts per day. That, never again. Now I just take 1 pair of shorts for the whole event and I manage to wash them, or maybe 2 pairs at most. So now I take a lot less spare equipment with me. What I do keep, though, is an extra pair of gloves and an extra pair of socks. But before, when I left for the Grappa, I set off with 4 pairs of socks. I had a set of clothes for each day. I had 2 down jackets. So I ended up at the post office in Italy, sending my gear back because it was just way too much. So really, for me, it was way too much gear, a lot of food, way too much repair equipment. For the first Grail, I got scared and brought my fears along. I had a first aid kit. I think that I could have saved an entire village in Italy with everything I had on me. And so now I only carry the bare minimum with me. And that's more than enough.
So from what you're saying, you gain some experience. There's also the fact of accepting discomfort and telling yourself, anyway, it's not a big deal. Actually, I'm dirty. It's fine. Maybe I'll be a little hungry. At worst, it's not a big deal. It's also about gaining self-confidence in your ability to find solutions in the moment. By the way, I released, just to draw a parallel, an episode on Ultratol. What impact do endurance sports have on one's own identity? And there's a connection with self-confidence. When you finish an ultra-distance event, it shifts certain boundaries. And so you have a bit more confidence in yourself than you did at the start because you were able to overcome this or that race incident or challenge that might have come up. So you end up feeling much more self-assured. So everything you're describing here, I completely understand it. What's interesting, moreover, is that among the people listening to us, at least those who are currently connected, since the episode will be recorded and rebroadcast on different platforms, the majority of people listening to us are preparing for their first Cross Series event in 2026. So that's why what you're sharing is so interesting. You're very likely going to save them time in their learning process and help them avoid mistakes. So it's about realizing that it's good to bring things along, but be careful not to bring too much. And often, as we see, there are a lot of ultra-distance cyclists at events who, the day before the start or on the day itself, unpack their entire bag, lay everything out on the ground, and repack it. And I think that from the moment you start asking yourself, do I really need this? You almost already have the answer. We pretty much know it. If you're asking yourself the question, then no, it's not essential. So you have to think about it and say, in the end, I'm not going to take it. I once found myself in the same situation as you, Jean-Marin, going to the post office and sending a package back because I realized I really wouldn't need it. That's for sure. And then moving on to your feedback, Jean-Marin, for people who are just starting out, what would you advise them in terms of, here, I'm talking about feedback on whether you should go straight for 500 or 1,000. Should you start with a 300 solo? Should you do a 500 as a duo? Can you share your thoughts on that? Because we've noticed that, in fact, teams make up a large part of our registrants, at least for 2025. And it's also a way of saying we're going to experience something together. But could you share your own feedback on this?
There are 2 things. I've done 300 solo, 300 duo, 500 duo, and 500 solo. And they were night races. Personally, I think what's really interesting is that riding at night for your first ultra is kind of an initiation. I would still recommend it. Either go for a 300 this year, solo or duo, because it can also test friendships, or a 200 by night.
Friendships or couples?
Exactly. I've done it twice with friends, including this year, the 500 graps with a friend, and it went really well. And honestly, it was a pleasure for 4 days. And we rode really well. We had booked hotels for ourselves in the evenings because we wanted to do it comfortably. And it was a really great time. I know people who have done it as a duo as well, and not necessarily as a couple, but as friends. And then it created some tension. So you have to, if you're worried, you can do it with a friend. This year, I'm supposed to do the Race Across France 300 as a duo with someone who has never done ultra distance before. And he asked me to go with him. So with pleasure, I'm going to accompany him and help him with all his training preparations beforehand. Up until the big day, because he was afraid of spending a day, maybe a night on the bike all alone.
Yes, it's interesting. But it's true that sometimes doing it as a pair, because there are solo, duo, and even quartet formats, it's a real challenge, sometimes a challenge within the challenge. On top of the distance, going with someone means you really have to accept sometimes being ahead or sometimes behind in terms of pace. And that's a real challenge. Sometimes the real victory is more about finishing together as a pair or a quartet than just covering the distance. In any case, it's interesting to hear your perspective on that. And for those listening to us who might be hesitating between an ultra-distance event at Gralps, which is full gravel really, a gravel event with a route that will inevitably include some road sections, we've adjusted the course this year. A big thank you to Natalie and Fabienne, by the way, if they're listening, for this new route on Gralps, which last year was very demanding, very mountainous. But at the same time, it's mountain gravel, and we're crossing the Alps. This year, we made the decision to have gravel segments. They're more rideable, so less steep overall, but more rideable. So what would you recommend yourself between a first experience in long-distance gravel or long-distance road? For you, in any case, what is the difference in philosophy?
So for me, there's a difference in philosophy between road and gravel, but also between different road events. Personally, I like long distances for the journey itself. And for me, a journey starts at point A and ends at point B. And something like the Race Across France, 300 kilometers, for example, to me, is more of a journey than a race across Paris. So because you set off into the unknown and so on. And I think it's even more exploratory when you're doing gravel, because you really go into places where you're alone, where you cross mountain passes at 2,400 meters, where there's no one around. And that's when it truly becomes an adventure. You're living an adventure. You're living a human adventure. Sometimes it feels like you're alone in the world, and it's pretty magical. So if you like a bit of adventure, if you enjoy solitude, set out on the Graal, because it's truly exceptional to see and ride such beautiful trails in a setting protected by an institution and an organization. So that's really magical. The stop in the heart of France, the road, that's also beautiful, because you'll pass over some exceptional summits. You get to do a bit of everything. The big mountain passes. So it really depends on what you're looking for. The 200 at night can also be quite magical, because for some people, long distance riding means riding at night. So that can also be a wonderful experience, because when you ride at night, all your senses change. A lot of things are different, and it's quite legendary, mystical. I don't really know how to put it, but I love riding at night, and I love heading into the night. Going into the night. And so it's really quite special, and that's what's great. There's something for everyone. Personally, I think the 300-kilometer road ride that starts at 8 in the morning is the easiest. It's a great adventure. On the road, you're protected. Everything is very well organized. If you really want adventure, to be truly solo, for me, it's the Grappo. It's a real gem. And this year, the route is in Switzerland. The route this year is stunning. Really, it's magnificent. The 300 and the 500 are truly amazing. You go over legendary mountain passes with exceptional views. If the weather is good, you'll be blown away by the scenery. So there you have it.
What you're saying, I completely agree with you, Jean-Marin. Our formats offer different distances, so it really depends on what you're looking for. You can challenge yourself if you have experience with the 1,000, the 2,500, or the 800 on the Grail. It's still quite an adventure. You cross twice. The Alpine Massif at altitude on the road, it's still very demanding, and you're right to point that out. This year, indeed, the starting point is Montpellier-La Napoule. However, the 300 and 500 kilometer formats start from Grand Montana, with the 500 kilometer route notably circling Mont Blanc. It's true that a 500 kilometer gravel ride circling Mont Blanc, when you love cycling, when you love adventure, with no competition or ranking, just living the experience, that's really something special. The Graups can give you that connection with nature. On the road, indeed, this year, we decided to introduce a 200-kilometer route. We had already tested it a bit in France at all our events. All our events now will have a 200, a 300, a 500, and a 1,000. And Quebec and France will both offer a 2,500 as well. Why did we create a 200? Because you could say that for someone who's competitive, a bit of a road cyclist or a racer, 200 is doable. So yes, it is definitely doable. But on the other hand, this one is entirely at night with a start at 8 p.m. You have a maximum of 12 hours to complete it. But riding at night, I'm sure those who have already ridden at night will completely understand what I mean. It's a totally different experience. You no longer have any visual reference points. You feel like you're going 300 kilometers an hour, but in reality, you're only doing 25. All it takes is a beautiful starry night, and then it becomes something truly incredible. In short, it's really an experience. And 200 kilometers at night is nothing like 200 kilometers during the day. And then, after that, the 300, the 500, it's about reaching new milestones depending on what you want to do. Indeed, I see that a few messages have been posted. It's true for Graups. This year, we decided to have a little less gravel than last year because we got some feedback. Apparently, it was too challenging last year. That is to say, the gravel sections were too demanding. It was really rough. So this year, we decided to completely rethink our route. That's what I was saying just before. And indeed, the gravel sections will truly be gravel sections, smooth and rideable, not requiring you to carry your bike, and not like some of the sections last time that were more like mountain biking or could catch riders off guard, especially those coming with carbon bikes and 35mm tires. It was complicated. So that's the choice we made. And it turns out that at least based on the feedback we're getting from registrations, it's quite positive because as we speak, we already have almost 2 or even 3 times more people signed up for the 300 and 500 kilometer distances than we did last year. So the event is already seeing strong growth compared to previous years, and it's only in its 3rd edition. There you go. That was just a small adjustment point, but indeed, to continue with what you were saying, Jean-Marin, we're offering formats that cater to everyone's desire for a challenge from 200 all the way up to 1,000 or even 2,500.
And what's great, if I may add, is that it's all done safely. Same thing, my first gravel, I found myself out there at 2 a.m., lost, disoriented at 3 a.m., because it's often between 2 and 5 or 6 a.m. that you start to feel disoriented, really out of it. And to call the PGO, so the security team, who got me back on track, put me back on the right path, helped me out, turn right, turn left. So they're there to watch over us, but they're also there to help us. And that, I think, for a first experience in ultra, it's important to know that you're not alone. You have your phone. You might be alone out in nature, but you have a connection with someone who can get you back on track because they know exactly where you are and they can really guide you back. So that's also something that's really appreciated. When you're starting out in long distance, knowing that you're being watched over, that you're being helped, let's say, along your journey.
That's interesting what you're saying. Indeed, the PGO that we created, we're now on the 4th edition. The PGO, which was created in 2022, but the PGO of today, in 2026, no longer resembles the PGO of 2022 at all, which was just the early beginnings of what we have now. But it has evolved over the years. And indeed, as we often say, the people who are on their bikes feel like they're alone in the middle of nowhere. And we have this almost satellite-like perspective, I would say. We're above it all, and we're able to say, be careful if you're not feeling well, if you have a problem. It's what I was saying with Lee last week. Listen, just wait a few minutes. There's a rider who's 2 kilometers behind you, so they'll be able to join you, help you, or reassure you. Or we've called the rider who's ahead and he stops. So that's it. We have that ability and that's our role. And that's how I launched the PGO back in, as I said, 2022. The idea was to say, yes, we're on open roads, but it's a competition, a solo event. You must not receive assistance from anyone else and you must not ride with anyone else, no matter the distance. We agree on that. Except if you're in a team of 2 or a team of 4, in that case, you can ride together. The goal is to let you know that if you have the slightest problem, we're here. And today, for example, during the last Cross France, it was almost 1,000 calls in 10 days or 1,000 interactions with the participants. Management-wise, as you mentioned, we noticed that at night, up until 10 a.m., or at least in the morning, there's a lot of disorientation. So we're here to get people back on track, to support them in various ways. A question for you, Jean-Marin, same for you from your experience. It's about managing your effort. What have you changed in your strategy and in how you approach things today? In an ultra-distance event, when it comes to managing your effort compared to when you started, do you approach it the same way? Are you more cautious at the start? Have you calmed down? Because in fact, your first experiences showed that you used to start way too fast. What have you changed in how you manage your effort? And what advice would you give to someone listening to us or listening again who's about to take on their first ultra experience?
It's very interesting because I feel like my first long distance ride, my first 300 kilometers felt much longer than the most recent ones. Because actually what I've learned and what I do now, even for my training sessions, is that I break my race down into a lot of segments. That is to say, when I set out for a 500 or a 300, I'm not actually setting out for 500. I'm setting out for the first 100 kilometers with a specific goal. And actually, the big thing I've changed is that I don't stress myself out anymore by saying, I'm going for 500 kilometers. Instead, I tell myself, I'm going for 100 kilometers. I'm going to stop. I know I'm going to stop. I'll have a Coke. And then I'll keep going. And for me, that was the biggest lesson, to break things down into segments. That way you take away all the stress of doing it. Your first 500 kilometers, your first 300 kilometers. And also, I like to challenge myself, sometimes aiming for a certain position and so on. But it's also about taking a step back. In any case, I'm not here to win. I'm here to enjoy myself. So it's about enjoying being on the bike, not trying to control everything, and really letting go, riding just for the pleasure of it. After 3 or 4 hours on the bike, if I see a bakery, I'm part of what's called the bakery team. I stop, I eat, I treat myself. So I set out telling myself I'll enjoy the first 100 kilometers, and then I'll set off again to enjoy the next 100 kilometers. And that's how, on the Grap this year, I did it as a duo. I did the 500 kilometers, but before setting off, I had already booked my nights, so I didn't put any pressure on myself. I'm not doing a 500 kilometer race. I'm doing 3 days of 150 to 200 kilometers each. And even just to tell you, we arrived in Cuneo, I think it was 3:30 p.m. on the second day. And we stayed because we had the hotel booked for that night. So everyone else was leaving. All the other competitors were heading out. But we stayed because in the end, that's where we felt good. We went to eat pasta in Cuneo in the sense that the goal was to enjoy ourselves. So that's really what I've changed. Not putting pressure on myself anymore, enjoying it and breaking up, really segmenting my ride, so to speak.
That's a good experience and a great thing to share. But I think you also learned from your first big mistake, where I remember seeing you arrive in Cuneo, and looking back now, we can talk about it, but you made a mistake. What 80% of the people who dropped out did in their strategy, everyone had said when leaving Montpellier, I'll stop in Cuneo for my first break. It turned out that the Col de Tende was extremely difficult. And in fact, the amount of time that almost all of you had planned between Mondelieu and Cuneo left you so fatigued that nearly everyone was burned out by the time they reached Cuneo. Whereas those who had the strategy of saying, no, I'll stop and sleep before, almost all of them finished. So that's something you probably learned from that experience too.
That's exactly right. It was Nathalie, by the way, and Fabien, who were doing the Grasse as a duo, since they themselves stopped at Grasse after just 40 kilometers. And we all kind of laughed when they said they were going to do that. And in the end, they were the ones who made it to Croix Montana. Me, I pushed on, I think it was 275 kilometers, and I arrived completely spent. So I set off again, but in the end, I only managed 100 kilometers the next day and had to give up. And that's why this year, when we left Turin at 1 a.m., after 4 or 5 hours of cycling, we already had our night stop planned for ultimately just to sleep. And so before I used to ride like that too. That's also an experience I had during the race across Switzerland, where I rode day and night, doing 500 kilometers without stopping, losing all sense of clarity, even falling asleep. Right in the middle of it, in the Jura on a bus bench. Well, now, that's a no. You stop, you sleep 3 hours, 4 hours, and that way you'll make it to the end. And in better conditions, and enjoying it, like I said earlier. So yes, every race allows me to keep learning again and again.
Interesting. So it's true that while you're talking, we have a few questions from people attending the webinar who are reaching out to us. So we had a question about the rules and specifically about the mandatory equipment, a cup. Well, if you have a water bottle, that's absolutely fine. It works. It serves as a cup to avoid, especially for environmental reasons, using disposable ones at the aid stations. Next, we have a question from someone who is taking on an ultra-distance event, a 1,000-kilometer race. They're asking us, is this really suicidal? What is your level of experience? So a 1,000-kilometer race, it's true that if you've never done ultra distance before, well, as the person just below commented, people are now asking for references for the 1,000 and the 2005 for the past few years because we've realized that there were people who let themselves be influenced by the beautiful images and also by the inspiring stories. Sometimes you say, I want to go for it, but be careful. 1,000 or 1,500 kilometers means managing your effort, managing the night, managing your progress, your mindset, your spirit. And when you don't have that experience, when you take on these challenges, well, it depends. 1,000 kilometers in Paris and 1,000 kilometers in Switzerland are not the same 1,000 kilometers. So it all depends on what your first experience of 1,000 kilometers is like. It's good to discover yourself, to face 1,000 kilometers in a first experience. Indeed, I think doing a first 500, then 1,000 is very interesting to understand your relationship with fatigue. And especially in the time slot you mentioned, Jean Marin, between 2 and 5 in the morning, that's when the circadian rhythm means that sometimes, even if you think you can handle fatigue well, you'll start nodding off because that's just how it is. And if you haven't had that experience, you might be caught off guard by the distance and find yourself in complicated situations. So the advice I can give is step by step. Do a 300. I'm talking to people who don't have experience. Be careful. Do a 300, get your bearings. Get your bearings. Do a 500, get your bearings. And after that, you can progress. But what you said about breaking down the goal and the distances, I think that's the best strategy. The best strategy to adopt, which will allow you, at least guarantee you to be a finisher. I'm not talking about performance here. And then, Jean-Marin, I just want to come back briefly to the equipment because sometimes when we talk about gear, people might think of something very expensive. It requires a significant investment. So I'll let you speak, but personally, I don't think that's the case. I think that nowadays, by being a bit clever and resourceful, and once you've gotten used to your bike, the investments aren't... I think it's more about adjusting your setup than making a big investment. I don't know what you think about that, but...
Yes, here, I'm really going to speak to those who are getting into ultra distance in the 300 to 500 kilometer range. There's no need to spend crazy amounts of money. You can invest if you want. It's like with luxury goods or marketing. You can buy aero racks you put on the back in carbon fiber and so on, which cost a fortune. They're pointless. Your top tube bag, your saddle bags, etc., that's more than enough. And to get started, the mandatory gear is sufficient. You also don't need the most expensive Gore-Tex for a 300-kilometer ride. It's really accessible. Honestly, that's really... me, foolishly, I didn't do that because no one told me. And I went and bought the best cycling shorts, which cost me a fortune, and which, in the end, aren't really that useful. But I know it's also human nature. Often when we start something, we want the best. Or when we get back into running, we buy a new pair of sneakers. So it's nice. It's those little treats, as we say, that make us happy. But for me, a good headlamp and quality lights, that doesn't cost much. There are brands that make affordable products. A pouch, there are brands that make really inexpensive ones too. Also, it means you don't need to invest huge amounts of money to do this. We're not talking about buying an ultra-compact sleeping bag. That's not what we're talking about here. I'm really speaking to those who are doing 300 or 500 kilometers. To give you an example, for instance, on the Strike. The Strike. I had bought a small sleeping bag, ultra-compact, ultra-warm, and in the end, I didn't even use it. And so that was part of my package that got sent back. And actually, now I have a bivvy, a survival blanket bivvy. And honestly, I just get inside it, and that's more than enough for me. For summer races, it's more than enough to sleep in that. And so it's really small and really inexpensive. You can buy it on any website or in bike shops. And that's more than enough, for example. And here we're talking about 40 francs, 40 euros versus 300 or 400 euros. A sleeping bag.
I agree with you. Indeed, you have to be a bit clever about it. And especially nowadays, there are more and more forums. We have a forum on Facebook, Resopras. There really is a lot of storytelling these days around, I'm sharing my adventure with you. There are also videos that explain how people are equipped. So I really think you should check out the different social networks, various websites, and videos that will help you gain experience. It really doesn't require a big investment, especially since the bike itself, the wheels, and those components are already expensive. Honestly, to get started in ultracycling, there are actually some things that are quite accessible. There's also a question from someone online who asks, for beginners, is it a good idea to try riding for 4 days with hotel stops without necessarily being in a competition? Well, I would say that it's a very, very good idea to prepare yourself. And I think that when you set out on a 1,000 kilometer ride, coming back to the previous question, if you've done 1 or 2 preparation weekends, it's definitely beneficial because it will allow you to check your position, your pain points, where they occur, whether it's your knee, your neck, your hands, and to adjust your position accordingly. It will also let you check your equipment. When I say your equipment, I mean your bags. Are they properly positioned? Did you attach them securely? Is it not moving around too much? Is the spot where you thought you'd put your food really the best place? Or as you ride, do you realize it's actually better on the left instead of the right? So I think it's a really good idea when preparing for an event to do 2 or 3 days of cycling beforehand. Maybe go out with some friends, why not? Just to check that what you had in mind, in reality, it's not that far off either. It's a good thing you did because we were completely off track. Yeah, I think it's necessary.
I'll give you a very simple example. The first time I did the race across France, 300 kilometers, I had never ridden at night before. And beforehand, I thought, hey, I should at least do a night ride. And actually, I had put my light on because I had a headband. I put my light on my handlebars, but I put it on the right side. And actually, because I couldn't detach it any better, I put it on the right side. And actually, we ride on the right, so the beam of light was hiding the cars. The oncoming cars couldn't see me. And that's something I hadn't thought about at all. And it was while riding one night that I thought, okay, right, that's what it is. But now on the left like this, people can see you. Same thing, on the top rack, I have a light. I put it on the left. Before, I had put it on the right. So all these little details I learned by putting myself in the situation. And that's it. And I'm coming back to that too. About learning during races, and it can be really good if you're riding as well. Like this, by training, if you have panniers, where do you put your gear? Do you put your food in the top tube bag or in the frame bag, etc.? And that's really a matter of learning. And I saved a lot of time that way. And for example, the things I don't use, or that I think I won't use, or hope not to use, I put them in my saddlebag, all the way at the bottom. My food is in the front. For a 300 kilometer ride, you can take a small power bank, but again, I put it somewhere I won't need to use it. So it's interesting to do it that way. But always, that's what I tell the people I ride with. On Tuesday group rides and so on, you always have to keep that sense of enjoyment. If you want to ride for 4 days to train, to try it out, keep in mind the pleasure of it, the discovering yourself through cycling. And for me, that's really what it's about. The most important thing is to enjoy yourself when riding long distances. Some people do long distance races, some do other types of races. Some say, no, I prefer bike torquing. But what we all have in common is that hopefully we're all happy on a bike.
What you're sharing is truly inspiring, and I completely agree with you. Testing things out in real conditions definitely helps you progress. What I really love when you set off for several days like that is that after just 1 day, you realize that you start learning how to live on your bike. There's always some arrangement in your panniers that will change, because in real conditions, it's not like how you planned it. And actually, whether it's better in the front or the back or more to the right than the left, I think it's great because after several days, you develop your own habits on your bike. And then you immediately know how you need to arrange things, how you open your zipper with your right hand, with your left hand. In short, I think it's great. I'm going to ask you one last question, G. Marin. It's probably maybe the hardest one, but does it make you want to set off again every time? That's kind of what I was saying.
Me, I have a family, I have a job, etc. But I get such a thrill when I'm on my bike because I feel free. It's pretty crazy to think that, isn't it? And actually, I really love it. I'm a cycling enthusiast. And really, when I set out, it's to seek out emotions. I set out to find that solitude. Earlier, I said that I love the night. I love heading into the night because I love that. That aspect where you start reflecting on yourself. For me, cycling is my yoga. And when I enter into that night, for me, all my senses awaken and I'm really in that reflective state. And that's what I'm looking for when I go out for such a long time or when I do multi-stage races. It's really about being with myself and simply enjoying it, truly feeling good on my bike. Is it a place where I can truly be myself? And that's what I try to tell everyone I ride with. It's keep smiling. That's what I want when I'm on my bike. That's what motivates me every time to sign up again to do all of this. It's kind of this quest for freedom. To set off and live, an experience that won't be the same as the ones I've already had. Because things are going to happen. Unlikely things. We might tear a tire. We might even encounter some animals. On the Grable 2 years ago, before dropping out, I found myself. It was an Italian grandmother who made me a stew with pasta. I never would have thought I'd experience something like that. Actually, it's a journey, and you end up living through extraordinary things. So every time I sign up, I tell myself maybe, and I hope, that I'll experience something extraordinary again. Something that's not normal, so to speak.
Anecdote. I think that for the 10th edition next year, we could make a book of anecdotes, but stories like the one you just explained. Those are things you just don't encounter in everyday life. So in any case, a big thank you to them. For everything you just told us as good advice, I think you saved people time and a lot of mistakes. In fact, you've helped a lot of people avoid many mistakes by listening to this webinar. I have 2 questions now. I'll take this opportunity to answer the questions at the same time. Benoit is asking us for a little advice about animals. At night, so we talked about it last week actually, animals at night. There are several techniques. First, it's your lighting. Make sure you're well lit so you have a good field of vision. And that's very, very important. The second point is that last year we made a whistle part of the mandatory equipment. It's not just for emergencies, like when you're stuck in a ditch and can't get up, to call for help, though that's what it's for. That's why the whistle needs to be attached to your backpack or your jacket. But in any case, it should be easily accessible. The whistle is also to scare off animals in day. Blowing the whistle from time to time can help deter them. Another technique is to sing. A lot of people do this during ultra-distance events. We have some really, really great singers out there. So anyway, you need to be cautious and make sure you're visible. Above all, you need to alert others and not hesitate to make noise at night. As for lights, I think the rules provide some guidelines for humans. But what's really, really important is to be comfortable, above all. We talked about it last week with Lee. You really need to avoid straining your eyes and make sure you have 1 or more lights. But in any case, make sure you're very comfortable. Some lights, you even have some with 2 or 3 settings, 3 speeds or even more, which let you adjust depending on the night. Is it a night that's quite bright with a beautiful full moon, or is it a very dark night? Is it sunrise, sunset? There too, you can adjust the level of your lights. Personally, I don't know about you, Jean Marin, if you have any, but I don't have a Lumini. I would say that the wider and more powerful your light beam is, with 2 or 3 settings, the better. It's really, really comfortable, and you really feel the difference in terms of fatigue.
Exactly. And as for me, I have a headlamp and I also have lights on my bike. Often, the lights on my bike have a wide beam, let's say. And with the headlamp, especially when I'm riding gravel, I set it to a long beam and then I aim with my head. And actually, I sweep the light in front of me. That way, it usually freezes the animals in place.
Exactly. That's a very good tip. That
can freeze them, and that way you just keep going. You stay on your route. So
awesome. Don't hesitate. In any case, if you have any questions, you can contact G. Marin on his social media. He's the one with the pink helmet.
And also, if I may, I run a blog as well, CASQUErose.com, and I have 2 articles that are related to our discussion tonight. One is called The Gear Guide for Self-Supported Ultra-Distance Cyclists. And then I have another article called The Survival Kit for Long-Distance Cyclists, How to Ride for a Long Time and Stay Alive.
A big thank you, really, G. Marin, for all this great advice. Don't hesitate to share this episode once it's released. Feel free to reach out directly to G. Marin if you have any questions. And don't hesitate to send us your questions as well on social media, whether it's about gear, advice, or joining. The community. On Facebook, RSE Cross Series, there's a forum for that. So you need to apply, and then once you're accepted, you can join the community. I think there are more than 17 or 18,000 people. That's quite significant. And I'll see you next week for a new webinar on another topic that's just as interesting and exciting. And then there's Stefan, who also comments on the Discord forum. The forum where we launched this last winter. With a lot of interest. We can see there are several channels, several discussion topics. There are also the Zwift Rails, where the Discord is present as well. During the Zwift Rails, we can chat and share some tips and tricks with you, and sometimes, why not, even a few exclusives. A big thank you, Jean-Marin. See you very soon. Looking forward to meeting you at a new starting line. And have a great evening, everyone, and a wonderful season.
Thank you.
See you soon. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, everyone.